Hello, welcome back to Learn Oikonomia. Today we are going to discuss the instruments of trade policy. So today we could find that when it comes to trade, we have to deal with both imports and exports. Imports and exports. So what happens here is that if a particular country finds that it is having a surplus production, it will be exporting the commodity to the rest of the world. So after meeting the requirements of its citizens, if it is having some surplus or if it is having some extra, it would be exporting the same commodity to the rest of the world, which you call as the export. Now coming to the import, what happens is that if you feel that you're not having anything in sufficient quantity, if a particular find that if a particular country find that the country is not having sufficient quantity of a particular good which is actually required by its people, what the country would be doing is that it would be importing the same good from the rest of the world. Now, this is what usually happens with respect to international trade, but you need to understand that now we are living in a globalized world. So what happens in the case of globalized world? In the case of globalized world, things are very complex. The domestic economy is having some integration with the rest of the world, right? So, since it is more complex and complicated, the government has to take some regulations as well as action source to deal with the international trade. So, when it comes to instruments of trade policy, we deal with such kind of regulations and actions. Here, we would be taking some tools so as to regulate the trade flows. This would definitely protecting the domestic industries from high level of competition that it would be getting from the competitors in the international level. Definitely, it would be managing the deficit because sometimes what happens is that if you're going for more import and less export, in such a scenario, the import payment is a money that you would be required to pay to the rest of the world for the import that you are getting from there, and export for export what you get is called receipts. So since you are giving some commodity to the rest of the world, they would be giving you money in return, which is called as export receipts. So when we compare these, sometimes import payment would be more than export receipts. So what is this creating? It will create a deficit situation, isn't it? So this deficit situation needs to be tackled. It should be managed, and for this also you can have different instruments of trade policy to be used. Definitely, when all these measures are being taken, that would be regulating economic growth, and you can have a more promotion of economic growth, and regulation of trade would regulate growth. It's not like you will have an unregulated growth. Your growth would be going in a healthy fashion. It would be a healthy kind of growth that the economy would be having. Both growth as well as development would come as a result of these. Now, taking you to the instruments of trade policy. The first instrument that you have is called tariff. So what does tariff mean? Tariff means a kind of tax that you would be imposing on imported commodity. So what will happen? When a tax is imposed on a particular commodity, the price of the commodity will be increasing. So what will happen if the price of the commodity increases? The price of the commodity, remember, it is increasing in domestic market. So if a particular country import a good from another country, the imported country, the country that is being importing the commodity, the importing country will be facing an increase in the price of the imported good in domestic market. Okay, so in such a scenario, this imported good will become more expensive in the domestic market, and it will be having a scenario of less competition. So what will less competition means? It is losing, this particular commodity is losing a competitive scenario. Why? Because the price is already high. So nobody will be, in most of the instances, people won't be purchasing it. In such a scenario, it becomes less competitive. So what is the implication here? It will be thus protecting the domestic industries from foreign competition. The domestic industries finds that, okay, now we are not having foreign competition, or we are not having competition from the foreign production or foreign commodity. So let's produce in such a way to have more production, more productivity, and so on. Apart from this, apart from increasing domestic production, tariff will be increasing government revenue, because government is imposing tariff, right? So it is acting as a revenue source to the government. You need to understand that the government will be having different types of revenue, like a tax and non-tax revenue, and tariff is actually acting as a tax on imported commodity, and for the very same reason it would be increasing the revenue for the government. And also, since actually you are having an experience of increased price of imported good, you could find that, okay, now the price of imported good has increased, and the price of domestically produced good is having a less price comparatively. So you do have a tendency to go for domestically produced good. So what happens to the demand for imported good? Demand for imported good, demand for import, this would be coming down. This would be coming down, and thus actual import would be coming down, and import payment would be coming down. Import payment would be coming down, and thus what happens? You require to pay only less to the rest of the world in terms of import payment. So you can deal with the trade imbalances. Trade deficit can be reduced. Now, the next important measure is called quota. So what does it mean by quota? This is a quantity-based restriction. Quantity-based restriction. So now, why this is being taken? You need to understand that the quantity of a particular good that can be imported into a country during a particular period is actually put under control. So you deal with the control of the volume of import. The imported quantity is being controlled. Again, why? When import is reduced with quota, when import is reduced with quota, the demand in the market would be met with production by domestic industries. So again, this is a measure to protect the domestic industries. That would again, since it is importing, since the country is importing less, it would be reducing import payment, and thus it will be managing the trade flows and would be reducing the deficit situation. Now, next is called subsidies. What are subsidies? It is a kind of financial assistance that the government would be giving to domestic producers. Why? Because when these kind of subsidies or financial assistance in the form of cash payments or tax breaks or other kind of incentives are given to domestic producers, they feel encouraged to produce more. And also we could find that when a part of the cost is being met by the government, for the producers, there is a reduction in cost of production happening, because the burden of cost is being reduced. Their cost burden is being reduced with the financial assistance that they could receive from the government. So what happens? Now our domestic producers would be able to adopt some modern technology too, because now they could find that a part of the cost is being met by the government. So that would make our producers to produce some quality rich products, quality based products that they can later export because our production and productivity is being increasing with the financial assistance given to our domestic producers by the government. So they will be able to give their product to the rest of the world in a scenario where our product would become more competitive in the global markets because we are having a quality rich product. Now, we are moving on to export control. What does it mean by export control? This is taken to reduce or this is to restrict our export. So usually we do have a tendency to increase our export. But in certain situations, especially in special circumstances, in special cases, we would be supposed to restrict our export. This is mainly taken for some security reason. And also you need to understand that we have to comply with international agreements. WTO is a very famous international organization that is regulating the world trade. So sometimes the WTO would be telling all its member nations to follow certain measures. In that, it might be saying the member nation to restrict the export of some specific commodities. So that what this would be actually protecting some sensitive industries. So it is just as a matter of requirement to comply with some international agreements or to deal with some security reasons. You go for something called export controls. Now we have something called dumping regulation. So what does it mean by dumping regulation? Dumping, again, before that, it's important to understand what is dumping. A country would be exporting good at a price which is below their cost or price in the domestic market. So you could have an example of India and China here. India and China. So let's take the case of toys. So what happens is that India will be producing some toys and China would also be producing some toys. What China would be doing is that China would be exporting toys to India. That means India would be importing toys from China. Now, you need to understand that in Indian market, you do have two segments. So we are talking about Indian market, okay, the domestic market of India. Now you do have Indian toys. And also you do have Chinese toys. In most of the instances, the price of Chinese toys would be comparatively lesser compared to the price of Indian toys. So what happens here? You do have a tendency to choose the cheaper good, that is the Chinese toy. Now what happens? China would be gaining the Indian market and Indian domestic producers would be losing the market. So it would be a kind of unfair competition that would be going on in Indian market in such a scenario. So the government would be taking something like anti-dumping measures because this dumping by China needs to be prevented so that we could restrict China from selling toys at a lower price in India as a result of this particular anti-dumping measures. Thus, we could protect our domestic industries. So, the toy making industry in India would be thus flourishing. Now, you do have something called trade agreements. So, what does it mean by trade agreements here? This would be involving certain terms and conditions that would be governing trade. So you will just go for some agreements. You might have heard about MOU, that is Memorandum of Understanding. So when two countries engage into some trade-related agreement, they will sign a Memorandum of Understanding. So that Memorandum of Understanding would be clearly specifying the tariff rate, quota related aspects and other barriers, the price, quantity, etc., etc. Everything would be specified in that. So why this is being taken? This is being taken to promote economic cooperation and growth. If both the trade partners are actually following this Memorandum of Understanding throughout their trade relationship, definitely that would be promoting economic cooperation and growth. Otherwise, if some of the party is deviating from this agreement, that would be causing, again, problems or complications. Now you do have another important measure that is called trade remedy. So what is trade remedy? So I was talking about some anti-dumping duties and all. So these anti-dumping duties, countervailing duties and safeguards, etc. are actually coming under trade remedies. You are actually reducing the quantity of import, or you are dealing with some, you are actually acting as a barrier. Some steps are taken to act as a barrier to prevent some unfair kind of competition. So these are only temporary measures. You just go for a short term or short period or shortened kind of things, temporary measures to deal with some unfair trade practices. So sometimes there would be something like a sudden increase in imports, sudden surges would be experienced in case of imports. Definitely it will be harming our domestic industry. So to control such kind of a scenario, you go for trade remedies, which is yet another tool or instrument that you use in the case of trade policy. Now there is something called customs valuation. So what does it mean by this? So this is undertaken, or this has been used in order to determine the value of imported commodities. That is again used for assessing duties as well as taxes. Only once you are able to understand the value of a product, you will be able to attach a duty or a price or etc. on this particular product, right? So assessing value is important for these. So what happens in the case of customs valuation is that it would be preventing something called under invoicing or misdeclaration of commodities, so as to avoid paying the correct duties. So what happens is that when you deal with something called prevention of under invoicing or prevention of misdeclaration, you will definitely avoid a scenario so as to deal with so you are actually avoiding a scenario of some bad kind of intervention. So avoiding paying the correct duties is bad, right? So you are assisting the scenario so as to have some context to make people or companies or nations to pay the correct duties. Okay. Now, so what happens here is that these kinds of instruments of trade policy would be actually shaping the international trade. This would be regulating the trade flows. This would help as to achieve economic and strategic kind of objectives. This would actually help the nation to come up with some kind of positivity and prosperity as a result of international trade. So that's it for today. Thank you for watching. You can like, share and subscribe to this channel for more videos. You can join our free Telegram community, and I'll be providing the link of the same in the description box. Also, you can download the Learn Oikonomia app. If you're preparing for competitive examinations in economics, you will be able to get question papers, previous year question papers, as well as study materials, as well as some weekly tests here. So I'll be providing a link of the same in the description box. That's it. Thank you.